Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming on such a nice day. It's hard to be inside, isn't it? We're going to be talking about actually saving the seeds now. Earlier in spring, I did a talk on how to get your garden ready to save the seeds so that you're, watching over your cross pollination and stuff like that. But today we're going to be talking about how to actually save the seeds. And I want to put a plug in for our plant and insect clinic. If anybody has any gardening questions, any gardening problems, contact us. It's a very easy email address to remember. It's cowlitzmastergardener@gmail.com. And we're also available there at the extension office. And if you are interested in becoming a master gardener, we have a wonderful training program and it's a volunteer service organization, and you share what you learn when you're done. And Gary would love to help you, set you up and give you information about it. And again, his email address is garyf@wsu.edu. Okay, I've got a question for you. Check out I'm not sure if I can find the chat box here. My screen's all filled up with the my presentation, but why are you saving seeds? And type it into the chat box, and Gary or Art will read to me what you've said.
I'm happy to read them.
Okay, great. Go ahead and type in why you want to save seeds. Everybody has a different reason.
Unknown availability and cost.
That's true.
Seed insecurity. Fun, exciting to watch them grow. Cost, to grow more from starts and share starts. Like a certain variety, the challenge.
Okay, those are really good ones, and I couldn't agree more. And it's fun. It's fun to do. It's a challenge to do it right, and you save money. And the big thing for me is I can grow what I want to grow. There are a lot of varieties that we master gardeners grow for our plant sale that you can't get anywhere else. You can't buy them in stores. You can't even get them, you can't buy them. You can't buy the starts in stores, much less the tomatoes. And the really good thing is if we are saving seeds from our garden, we can grow them best. They are acclimated to our climate and our soil. And that's something that's really important, which is why one of the reasons why the Longview Library is working on getting a seed bank started. So before we get started, I wanted to tell you what we're going to be talking about. We're going to do a fairly quick review on things that are important to know about seed saving. And you do need to know a little bit about the process, or you're not going to be able to get the seeds that you want. There are different flower types. We're going to be talking about the difference between heirlooms, hybrids, and open pollinated plants. Annual and biannual plants, when do you save the seeds from those? And self-pollinated plants versus cross-pollinated. Then we're going to be talking about harvesting dry seeds, then wet seeds, and how do you store them. So let's start with this. Seeds are really kind of amazing. A teaspoon can hold 350 spinach seeds, but some coconuts are like 6 to 12 inches in diameter. But what's really cool is that every seed contains the instructions in its DNA to create another plant just like itself. It's got a little baby plant inside that seed. There are always minor variations in gene expression, and sometimes random mutations can result in a plant that isn't found in the parent plant. And that's what's fun about saving seeds. You just don't know what you're going to get. Now, self-pollinated plants or flowers are ones that actually pollinate before they open. So there's very little chance of another kind of plant's pollen to get in there and pollinate. And examples of that are tomatoes, peas, and lettuce. They actually pollinate themselves for the most part. Most tomato plants do before they even open. It's because of the structure. You've got the pollen on the anthers, and they deposit themselves on the the female part of the flower, the stigma. And then they go down and they produce the fruits in the ovaries. And you only get one plant, you only need the one plant for seeds that work. And there's advantages and disadvantages to that because you have a whole lot less genetic diversity if a plant pollinates itself. But the male and female plants or parts are on one flower on the same plant. Now we talk about cross-pollination. Some plants must be pollinated either by another plant or another flower on the same plant, or they need insects to put the pollen from the anthers onto the stigma. And you can see that here. So a bee could go from there to there, or the wind could drop it over onto the stigma from another flower or from the same flower itself. But when the flower opens, it wants to be pollinated then. So here we come to the terms that you see on all seed packets. What do they mean? Open pollination. It's any, and I hate to do this to you because I'm giving you another term that won't be described until the next slide. Open pollinated variety is any one that is not a hybrid variety that somebody actually engineered to produce that variety. Open pollination refers to the seeds produced without control of the pollen source. So you've got this flower open like we saw on the last slide, and you have no control over, unless you get a paintbrush and actually physically, put the pollen on from one flower onto the other, or from the male part onto the female part. You have no control of the pollen source. All heirloom plants are open pollinated, but they've been kept stable through a whole lot of generations. And it's fairly easy to do with tomato plants. If you plant seeds from an open pollinated plant, it'll frequently breed through and be just like the parent plants if it's pollinated, self-pollinated, or cross-pollinated by the same variety. Now that sounds like it should work all the time, but that isn't necessarily the case. So if you buy a pepper plant that is open pollinated, and you protect it when the flowers open after it's fertilized or pollinated, and protect it, you can make sure that the plant, the peppers that you grow from that plant, will be like the parent plant. And examples of these are open pollinated tomatoes, beans, peas, and lettuce. Actually, that's not quite right. So let's go now. Hybrids. This is where that, looking like the parent plant goes askew. You've got hybrids are an intentional crossing between varieties. They can occur naturally in your garden. If you have this kind of plant next to that kind of plant, it produces something completely different. If you click in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom screen and click on speaker view, you'll be able to see what I'm going to hold up here. I think, well, maybe you won't, because we're still slide sharing. Anyhow, this is from my garden. It is a hybrid. I created that by not paying attention. We had a real pretty zucchini, a regular green zucchini, and then I had yellow crookneck squash. And this spring, a volunteer popped up. I had no idea what it was going to give us. And what it brought was this. It's kind of like a zucchini, but it has bumps all over it like the crookneck squash. So I created a hybrid. A lot of times they don't taste good. They're just kind of a curiosity, but I actually like this a lot. And I won't be able to save the seeds from that because it is a hybrid. It's got a whole lot of different genetic information in there, and it's not stable. The first generation is an F1, or the filial generation, the first filial generation, and it's usually very vigorous. And you usually get something that looks pretty much like the parent plant. After that, all bets are off. You can get all kinds of things, and I'll show you pictures of that. So cultivars are, instead of varieties, they're called cultivars if they're hybrids, because they were created by human intervention. And my variety was naturally occurring within the species because apparently one of my zucchinis was cross-pollinated by a bee and went over to my crookneck squash, and then a chipmunk planted it at a really far distant area of my garden. So this is what can happen. You've got a butternut squash and a cushaw. The blossoms were completely unprotected when they were open, and somebody saved the seeds, and this is what came up from 4 different plants. You can get a little bit of everything, and you know, these 2 look like the parents. These 2 don't look anything like it. And you'll see that with peppers too. This is a pepper that crossed with this, and look at the variety you got from the different plants they planted, or different seeds that they planted from the resulting mix of these 2. And here's another example. If you've got one of these little bitty tomatoes and probably a sun gold and one of the big classic beefsteaks, you can end up with this or with any combination of looks. They may not taste the same. Most of the hybrids were developed for taste or for resistance to disease. And when you cross them back again like that, all bets are off. You just don't know what you're going to get. Another important term is annuals and perennials. Annuals are plants like tomatoes and peppers. They complete their life cycle in one season. So you go from seed to plant, fruit, and then to seed. Now biennials, like carrots, for example, you plant the seed, you get the roots come out, you harvest the roots. But if you leave those in, it's next year that they develop the flower, next spring. So it's 2 seasons, and you can collect the flowers from it next season. Although I wouldn't advise it, because they can also cross with Queen Anne's lace, which is wild carrot, and you can end up with something really nasty. Just kind of, it'll smell good, but it'll be a woody white root. Okay, and this is just an example of a cabbage. You planted the seeds, you got the heads, you store it. Well, in some places you have to store it. You probably would here too, because we do get some freezing temperatures. You would plant it again in the fall, plant the roots again, and then it goes to seed. And that's when you would collect those seeds. Don't be afraid of making a mistake. When I was involved at the beginning of the seed library, they were very concerned about getting pure seeds. And you know, what's the fun in that? You know, look at the really great variety of squash I created by letting nature take its course. On the other hand, I can understand it if they're trying to create a seed library and you're going in there to get a classic beefsteak tomato, and you end up with some strange little plant that, you know, because they weren't protected, it came up differently. A cross-pollination mistake should be viewed as an opportunity. So just have fun in there, and you can always eat your mistakes, especially the squash variety. Let me tell you, I have made some really, really good zucchini bread, although it's not really a zucchini, out of my hybrid, or my hybrids that are really good. So the self-pollinating plants are the ones that are safest for us to save seeds from, because they frequently self-pollinate and complete their growing cycle in one season. If you save the seeds from an open pollinated plant and there has not been any cross-pollination from any other plant of the same species, you can expect that the seed will be the same as the plant that you planted. We're not going to get into this part now because this is part of the spring talk. There are ways to protect the open pollinated plant from unwanted pollination from other plants. You know, you can separate them by distance, you can separate them by planting, you know, staggering your times of planting them. You can bag them, put them in net boxes so that no other plant, once they're pollinated, you know, you can control pollination. Most of the times the plant's flowers are made so that they are pollinated. So the lettuce during development, the female part, it brushes on the anther, and it's usually by wind. If these plants like peas and tomatoes and beans, if you want to help them to make sure you get good pollination, tap them. tap them during the flower stage before they open up, and that way the pollen from the anthers get right onto the stigma of the female, and it will be fertilized when it's open. And it says that I read that the degree of cross-pollination in self-pollinated plants is only 2 to 4%. So that means that with these self-pollinated plants, there's only a 2 to 4% chance that once they open, they can be cross-pollinated. So you've got a pretty good chance of having the plant that you want come out of that. Now, this is pertinent to what we're doing right now. What are the best plants for seed saving? You want the best plant you've got, and you want the best fruit from the best plant. You want to make sure that it doesn't have any disease on the plant and there are no insects on it. You may want to select for the plant that ripened earliest in your garden, maybe tasted best. For some of the plants like lettuce, that it didn't bolt as quickly as some other ones. Maybe the tomatoes, they didn't crack as often as some do. Root size, maybe the hottest pepper on that plant, you know, you might want to select that, the seeds for that. And how hardy it was. Did it handle being in cold temperatures? So keep an eye on your garden and see how they look, but always choose the best plant and the best fruit. You want high quality fruit to save the seeds from. And my suggestion is to grow something that you love and start small. Only try to save seeds from a couple of plants. And one of our master gardeners is very, very particular about how she does things. She does it by the book. And I think she's finally coming around to see that it's always trial and error. You can do the best you can, follow by the book, and you still end up with things not turning out exactly the way you want. But boy, you remember that. And if it's a mistake, it won't happen again. And sometimes you find it's not a mistake and it worked out better than what you thought it would. Okay, now we're going to start saving seeds. Again, healthy, very mature plants, and we'll talk about what very mature means. The seeds, after we get them ready to store, must be clean and dry, and we'll talk about how to do that. Like I said, the easiest ones for us to save are peas, beans, the different legumes, because they are self-pollinating and you don't have to worry about cross-pollination. You will probably get, you know, fruits that look and taste like the plant that you saved them from. Lettuce and tomatoes. Eggplants and peppers, you got to be a little bit more careful with, unless you've grown them like one variety and there are no others around, including in your neighbor's yard, because the bees can go from their yard to your yard and create hybrids that you may not want. The brassicas, the cauliflower family, they are very, very promiscuous. They will create all kinds of weird hybrids. So if you want to keep the kale and broccoli, Brussels sprouts, they must be protected from cross-pollination. And the same thing with cucumbers, melons, and squash. They can cross-pollinate with each other like I showed you. So harvesting dry seeds, and these are the ones like peppers, herbs, beans, lettuce, carrots, and onions have dry seeds. And the general guidelines is you want to collect the seeds before 10 a.m., but after the dew is gone. Collect from a healthy plant, like we said. Collect the fruit and vegetables when very ripe, and they don't all ripen at the same time. So just there's a 4 to 8 week interval that you can collect them. So you may want to start early, and you may want to collect more as you go. The general guideline is to harvest when 60 to 80% of the seeds are ripe. And that doesn't work for, that works for things like lettuce and beans and things like that, not for tomatoes and peppers, because you're only collecting them from one fruit. So these are the things you look at to know that they're ready. The color of the fruit or the seed or pod, how dry it is, like spinach or onion. You cut the seed open and see if the inside is starchy instead of milky. So And there's a big difference. If you crush one of those seeds before they're ready, if you've ever, torn off a piece of one of your lettuces in the garden, it runs a milky sap. Well, the seeds will do that too, unless they're a little bit further along, and then they're just, the inside is starchy, but it doesn't run that milky latex. If the seed inside the pod or inside the fruit can break away from the plant itself, it's probably ripe. So for peas, beans, lettuce, brassicas, carrots, and herbs, ornamental flowers, harvest when the seeds are dry. They will actually fall out of the flower at that point. If they aren't ready to fall out by themselves, then they're not ready to go. You can store the seed pods in a garage, hang them upside down, or you can crumble the seeds or heads in a bowl and separate the seeds from the shaft by screening or winnowing. I've got some, I think I've got a picture of it here. I'm right now saving some seeds from nodding onions and from some of my herbs out there, some of my pollinator plants. And this is one of those little organza bags that you get, party favors in. And I put those over the flowers and I tie them shut and I get a twist tie so that the seeds can't get out. And I just let the flowers continue, or whatever it is, continue to dry until they're ready to fall out. And then I shake it, I tap them, and I end up with all the seeds at the bottom of the bag. It's a really easy way to do it. For larger plants, you can get a paper bag because there's still pretty good airflow in that, and catch the seeds. If you store the seeds upside down in your garage, you can put a bag around them and tie them with a piece of twine or something and catch the seeds so they don't fall on your garage floor. So with peas, beans, and legumes, the pods should be allowed to dry on the vine. It's best that they do that, and the plants should be completely dry. The pods should be papery. You should be able to feel it. You can break them over a bowl like is shown here. You can store the seeds in the freezer for 7 to 10 days to kill any weevils, which are a common problem with peas. And the seeds must be totally dry to prevent damage from the freezing process. And we're going to be talking about how to do that. So if you go out in your garden, here's what the peas look like getting ready to go. It's not ready to harvest until they're all the way here. If you've got anything here, they're probably not ready to go. This is all papery and thin, and it's ripe. Now, pepper should look like this, like it's been in your refrigerator for 2 months and you just discovered it was there. Very mature. They shouldn't be shiny anymore. The skin might start to look wrinkled. The color changes from the green to red or orange or yellow, whatever the mature color is for that particular variety. Again, they're kind of dull, but they shouldn't be rotten. There shouldn't be any rotten areas. Cut through the shoulder, which is this part of the fruit, and gently scrape the seeds from the fruit and spread them out to dry. And your best, if we don't have a lot of rain, leave them on the fruit or leave them on the plant to get that way instead of bringing them in. Hot peppers should be left on the plant until most of the fruits are dry, and then pull out the plant by the roots intact and hang them upside down in a warm area to store until you use them. Lettuce, this is actually in my garden. This is that bag I was telling you about. I'm not sure. This is my nodding onion, though. It's not lettuce, but this is how I do it. And you can see that the seeds are actually falling from the flowers. So this type of saving works for herbs, onions, carrots, flowers, cabbage family, and spinach. Oh, that shouldn't have gone into a different one there. Okay, the outer leaves, you can harvest the outer leaves from a plant that you're going to save seeds from before the lettuce leaves start, the lettuce plant starts to bolt. Once it bolts, you're probably done eating it and let it go to flower. And this is a quick and easy one to do because the seeds are ready 21 days after the flower blooms. To harvest, again, put them into a bag every day during that period and shake them. And the loose seed will fall into the bottom of the bag, and quick and easy harvesting. An alternate method, if you have to, is wait until 10 days after flowering to take the whole plant out, hang it upside down in your garage with a bag over the flowers and collect the seeds that way. There are a couple ways, and brassicas, you pretty much do the same thing, but they love to cross-pollinate with each other. So again, during the growing season, you should probably either protect them or stagger the times, only grow one variety. That's one way to do it. You know, don't grow cauliflower and cabbage in the same garden so that they don't cross-pollinate with each other. And you can only let one plant go to seed. That's another way to do it. So you can enjoy them all and only let one plant go to seed, and you don't have to worry about them getting cross-pollinated. Harvest when the seed pod is halfway up the stalk, when it's full of seed like that. Hang the flowers upside down to dry, then break open over a bowl or hang them upside down and collect them in a bag. And I'm going to be having to do this because I've collected a bunch of seeds now that have all the chaff in them, and I'm going to have to either get a screen. I don't think I'll do it that way because I don't have that many seeds. I'm going to let the wind or a fan winnow it. And here's an example of how you would do that. The seeds are heavier, they'll go into the bowl and the chaff will blow away. I'm going to try it with the fan. Hardware cloth is another way. You can rub the seeds over the hardware cloth and it'll break off. And then they suggested that you use different size hardware cloth screens to get the seeds down. But you'd have to have a whole selection of screens for that. Now we're going to go to harvesting wet seeds. That's a different game altogether. There are two kinds of wet seeds. One is surrounded by pulp, like squash, melons, and eggplants, and the other ones are protected with a gel coat that inhibits germination, like tomatoes and cucumbers. But we're going to start with general directions for how to do that with the wet seeds. These are the ones that, well, that's supposed to be gel, with no gel coat. We're going to start with the squash, the melons, and things like that. In the squash or melon cavity, get them out, pull them out with your fingers and release as many of the seeds as you can from the pulp into a bowl. Then soak in cool hour from 3 to 24 hours in a cool place, no longer than 24, and keep an eye on them, because if you let them go too much longer than that, they will start to sprout and then you won't be able to save the seeds. But the reason for doing that is to help to separate the seeds from the pulp. And then you'll drain them, dry the bottom of the sieve, and then get the seeds out of there and pat them dry, put them on glass, metal, or plastic. You don't want to put them on paper towels or a paper plate, because when they dry, they may stick to that surface and you won't be able to get them up and you'll ruin the seeds. So glass, metal, or plastic plate, that's what you want to save these wet seeds on. And they should be put in a warm, dry place to dry out, but not in sun and not too hot. You want to kind of move them around on the plate to make sure that they're getting completely dry. You can turn them over, for a couple of weeks there to make sure that they are completely dry. Again, that is the most important thing about seed saving. The seeds have to be dry, and we'll talk about how to actually test for that. And one of them is the bend versus snap test. And we are going to store them in a moisture-proof container and store in a cool, dark place. And we'll get into that in more detail later. For summer and winter squash, you want to get a very, very ripe fruit, and you're going to save it from the blossom end. And I'm going to hold this up. This still has the blossom on it. It's the end that's farthest from the stem that you picked it. It's the most mature part of the plant, and therefore the seeds will be the most mature. So you're going to collect it from the bottom 2/3 or the bottom 1/3 of the fruit. You can harvest it before maturation and let it harvest, inside the house or in a warm place, because the seeds in squash will continue to ripen. So Another way to tell, especially with winter squash, if the rind is too hard to dent with a fingernail and the stem should be dry, then it's ready to pick, ready to save the seeds. However, with winter squash, you may want to store them in your house for another 2 to 3 months. They will continue to, as I said, ripen as they sit there, and you'll get a better germination rate if you let them sit there. Zucchini and summer squash, very large, very overripe, hard flesh that's changed color already. This used to be green, now it's yellow. And again, select only the seeds that are farthest from the stem. And you can store this for an additional 3 to 4 weeks also before you get the seeds. Eggplants should be wrinkly and dull, not real pretty, nothing that you would choose in the grocery store. It's got to be very, very ripe. And again, you only choose the seeds farthest from the stem at the blossom end. And there are a couple ways of getting the seeds from these. You can bring the ripe fruit in the house and save it for an extra 4 or 5 weeks. The color should change to tan or brown, just not real pretty. And again, the bottom third of the plant. And you can separate the seeds 2 different ways. One is separate the flesh using a box grater. Like this, you just run it over that and get the seeds out there. Another way is to cube the fruit and put it in a food processor with a little bit of water. It'll make a slurry. Please mute your microphones. Pour the mixture into a jar and shake. And pour off the pulp, and the good seeds will sink to the bottom. And then you just keep doing it until you get all seeds down there. And then you rinse it, and you can dry it on coffee filters or a glass dish. I would recommend a glass dish after you've kind of patted them dry. So now the other kind of wet seeds are the ones that are surrounded by a gel coat, like tomatoes and cucumbers. They help the seeds to not germinate inside the plant. If you've ever seen a tomato that has sat too long on your counter, you can cut it open and you can see little seeds, little plants starting to grow in there. That's called viviparity. And what happened is the gel coat that inhibits germination has broken down with age, and they're starting to germinate inside your tomato. It's kind of cool, isn't it, actually? Again, the tomato or the cucumber should be really big, overripe. The skin will be very bitter. It's not something that you'd eat. It's something you would throw to your chickens, but you wouldn't eat. And again, you want to take it from the bottom third of the plant, the furthest from the stem. It's really easy to do. You just cut open the plant or the fruit, tomatoes or cucumbers, squeeze out the seeds into a jar, 1-to-1, cover it with water. And here's my tomato seeds and pulp. And you're going to cover it, either put a lid on it or cover it with wax paper or paper towel in a warm place. And over the next few days, it's going to start to ferment. And this fermentation process will remove the gel coat and make it so that you can save them and they'll be ready to plant next year. You want to swirl it around a couple times a day because that kind of distributes that fermentation and helps to helps to improve the removal of the gel coat, kind of speeds it up a little bit. After 3 to 6 days, you're going to get mold on the top. And you're going to either, after you've stirred it around, you've kind of agitated it a little bit, and then at the end, it's going to be there again. Spoon that part off. You're going to be spooning off the pulp and the fermentation mold. And you're also going to be taking off some of the bad seeds that didn't sink to the bottom, the ones that floated to the top, they're no good. So you're going to add water after you scoop those off. You're going to drain it first, and then you're going to fill it with water. And you're going to rinse it until the water comes out clean. And you're going to use the strainer to catch the seeds. And you just keep doing this until the water's fresh and clear. And once that's done, you take the seeds out, layer them, pat them dry, lay on glass, metal, or plastic surface, and it may take 3 or 4 days. So how do you know if they're dry enough to store? Well, here's some basic guidelines. You want to dry them as quickly as possible to reduce disease potential like fungus, which is the bane of seed storage. Spread the seeds out in a thin layer, and you can also put them on screen because you get really good air circulation now. And don't expose them to temperatures above 95. Other quick ways, you can use silica gel. I don't know if you can see that. I've got some silica gel packs that I saved from vitamin jars, and I put those in my glass jar with my seeds. They help to draw the extra moisture out of the seeds, but you want your seeds in a labeled envelope. You don't want the seeds to come in contact with the gel. Small seeds are ready for storage when there's only 3 to 5% seed moisture, large when there's only 5 to 7% seed moisture. Yeah, so how do you do that? There's one way to do it. You can actually weigh the seeds before you put them in and then weigh them when they come out, but that's way too much work. But we've got other ways that we can make sure that we've got dry seeds. You can also use a food dehydrator, which I've never done, but some people use it and they swear by it. You can also use an oven, but I don't know about your oven. Mine won't go to 85 degrees, but my food dehydrator will. The time's going to vary by the type of seeds, but it's usually around 6 hours. Another way is to use this process. You can bake 1 cup of rice in the oven until it's really, really dry, about 45 minutes. While the jar is still hot, put it in a 2-cup glass and screw the lid on and let it cool. And once it's cool, you can put your seeds in a sock or a bag, secure it with a rubber band, and stick them in there with that rice. And that rice will pull out any extra moisture that remains after you had it sitting for the time that was required on your glass plate. You can also buy silica gel beads that are reusable, and I just bought some. They haven't arrived yet, so I'm going to try that this year. I think that'll be fun. And again, you leave them in the sock for about 24 hours, and then you put them in the envelope and you store them. And we'll talk about storage here too. Another way that a lot of people use, if you've got seeds like cucumbers would work too, but squash, if you bend them and they snap, they're dry enough. If you bend them and they just bend and they don't snap, they still have too much moisture. Some of the smaller seeds, if you take a hammer and hit it, if they squish, they're too wet. If they shatter into little pieces, they're dry enough to save. Thick seeds like corn and beans, that's the ones you'd want to hit with a hammer. The thin seeds like squash will snap when very dry. Another way to tell is you place the seeds that you've got in an envelope in a container and put the lid on it overnight. Have another envelope there. When the seed comes, when you open it up in the morning and the seed envelope inside the jar feels damper than the one outside the jar, then it needs to dry out a little bit more because the water will absorb extra moisture. One suggestion was to use a few kernels of rice to absorb moisture, like you see sometimes in outdoor restaurants. They put a few pieces of rice in the salt jar to keep them from sticking together. And damp seeds are the most common failure of seed saving. So we really want to avoid that. So we want to use moisture-proof, airtight glass containers. If you use plastic bags, you can get vermin in them. Mice will eat right through it. Insects can too. Plastic tubs, bins, bucket might restrict moisture release, and it's somewhat protective. But if you've got a squirrel that's really wants to eat, he'll eat right through that container. I've seen it happen. Glass jars are really the best way to do it. You want to store the seeds in cool, dark conditions, like your refrigerator or in a unheated part of your basement or garage, as long as the garage doesn't get too warm. You want to label very carefully with all the information that you need, the variety and the date at the very least, but you want more information. The more information, the better. And your seeds can be viable for between 1 and 5 years. A lot of it depends on the storage container. Again, airtight, moisture-proof glass container. And these are really good. Food preservation, the bell jars, the mason jars, they're really good for storing that. Oh, there we go. So for medium-term storage, it's a refrigerator. Long-term freezer can be used. But you've got to watch, if you have seeds that are moist, then if you freeze them, crystals are going to form and it's going to damage the embryo. And taking it in and out of the freezer, well, the temperature fluctuations may also damage it. The seeds must be airtight and must be very dry, or you just can't use the freezer. And another thing that's important, if it's either refrigerator or freezer, to allow it to reach room temperature before opening it. The one good thing about it, it will catch any it'll stop any insect or insect eggs because it will kill them. It doesn't do anything about soil-borne diseases, but you pretty much know in your garden that you saved it from a good plant without any disease. So, and it's for your personal use. So that's okay. If you were going to sell these seeds, there are sanitation methods that you might want to use, like bleaching them, but for home use, it's not important. Now, for each 10% decrease in seed moisture, the life of the seed is doubled. And for each 10 degrees decrease in temperature, the life of the seed is doubled. So moist, gone, no moisture or very little moisture and very low temperatures, you're going to be able to have a seed that will last a long time. Most vegetables, 3 to 5 years if stored properly, and the shorter lived seeds like leeks, onions, and parsnips, they can last about 1 to 2 years. You want to put the type of the plant on the label, on the envelope, and I'm going to show you how to make an envelope. It's really cool, really easy. The variety name, when you collected them, how many days to maturity, what you got from your seed packet label when you planted them, and anything else that you want to make notes about. Put it all on here. You think you'll remember, but you won't. This is a really, really easy way to make a seed envelope. And all it is a square piece of paper. There we go. Fold it in half. Fold these down. One of the little corners, oops, goes into the other here. And you put the seeds in here between the peaks. And then you fold it over so that the peak is down below, bend it, and then you tuck it in the bottom. So all you have is a little envelope. And that's all there is to it. If you, on the website that I put into the chat box, if you go there, this is on the resource sheet that you can download, and you can make these yourself. It's cheap, it's easy, and they're the perfect size for your seeds. So we talked about the different things that you need to know about getting the seed that you want. What kind of flowers, the self-pollinated, or the ones that pollinate themselves, or ones that need either wind or insect pollination. The difference between the hybrids, which are engineered combinations of plants for certain specific qualities, heirlooms, which are open pollinated plants that have been cultivated and are very stable over generations, and then open pollinated plants, which we don't have a whole lot of control over how they're pollinated unless we take additional measures. Annual plants that complete their cycle in 1 year, biennial plants that you plant them 1 year and harvest the seeds the next year, and the difference between cross and self-pollination. And we talked about the different ways that you can harvest dry seeds and wet seeds, and the best methods for seed storage. Okay, again, if you would like links to this workshop, the video, the slides, contact Gary, or you can go to cowlitzcomg.com. And on the menu, look for 2021 workshops, and you'll see all the workshops that we had, and this one will be at the very bottom of the page. So that's cowlitzcomg.com, or email garyf@wsu.edu. Are there any questions?